All right, today we're tackling a massive global issue, that constant tug of war between international trade and, protecting the planet. And smack dab in the middle of it all, the World Trade Organization.
You see it framed this way all the time, right? Like it's some kind of heavyweight championship fight. Global trade in one corner and the planet in the other. Headlines are always pitting economic growth against environmental health. But is it really an either-or situation?
Well, the reality is, it's a whole lot more complicated. So let's think about it differently. It's less of a fight and more of a really delicate balancing act. And in this picture, the WTO isn't a fighter. Nope, they're the referee, trying to make sure the game is played fairly for everybody involved, including the environment.
So, where did this idea of a big conflict even come from? Well, this isn't exactly a new conversation. It's a debate that's been shaping up for decades.
Okay, so let's do a quick trip back in time. This whole thing really exploded onto the global scene way back in 1972 at the Stockholm Conference. Then you jump ahead 20 years to the Rio Summit, and suddenly the conversation is all about sustainable development. By the time we get to 2002 in Johannesburg, that link between trade and the environment is pretty much set in stone in international policy. So yeah, this has been building for about half a century.
Now, this is where things get really interesting because a lot of people just assume the WTO only cares about free trade and that the environment is, an afterthought. But that's not the whole story, not even close.
In fact, if you go look at the WTO's founding document, the Marrakesh Agreement, it's right there in black and white. The text explicitly says that sustainable development and environmental protection are priorities. This wasn't something tacked on later, it was baked into the organization's DNA from the very beginning.
Okay, so if that's the goal, how does the WTO actually shape environmental policy? Let's break down the rule book they use. And it all starts with getting your head around one key economic idea.
And that idea is negative externalities. I know, it sounds super academic, but it's a really powerful concept. It just means all the environmental damage, think pollution, that doesn't get included in the price of a product you buy off the shelf.
Let me put it another way. The price you pay for a plastic bottle doesn't include the potential cost of cleaning up that same bottle from the ocean. That hidden cost is the externality. And a huge chunk of environmental policy is all about trying to make those hidden costs part of the actual market price.
And this gets us to subsidies, which, well, they can be a real double-edged sword. You've got positive subsidies, the good guys, that help fund things like renewable energy. But then you have harmful subsidies, which encourage stuff like overfishing or burning fossil fuels, the very things that create those negative externalities. The WTO's job is to somehow create rules that can tell the difference.
So what's in the WTO's rulebook? Well, a really important part, Article 20 of GATT, says countries are allowed to restrict trade to protect the environment. But, and this is a huge but, they can't just use it as a sneaky excuse to block competition. The WTO also works to make it easier to trade green-friendly goods, like solar panels. They try to regulate those subsidies we just talked about, and they offer help to developing countries trying to meet these goals.
Okay, so we've got a rulebook. But rules don't mean much if the referee isn't watching the game, right? So how does the WTO actually monitor what countries are doing? They've basically got 5 main tools in their toolbox. They do regular check-ins through policy reviews, and they have committees where members can talk things out. Countries are required to notify everyone else about new rules, so there's transparency. And then there's technical help, and of course, a whole system for when disputes pop up.
And you can really see the two sides of the coin here. On one hand, you have the Committee on Trade and Environment, which is proactive. That's the forum for discussion, for trying to get ahead of problems. Then you have the reactive side, the dispute settlement body. This thing acts like a court, stepping in to resolve fights when one country thinks another's environmental rule is just an unfair way to block trade.
So at the end of the day, here's the takeaway. The WTO provides the framework. It writes the rule book. But it's the players, the actual member nations, that have to decide how they're going to play the game.
And that leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? As the environmental stakes just keep getting higher and higher, will the balancing act that the WTO has been managing for decades be enough? Or are we going to need a whole new set of rules for the challenges of tomorrow? That's definitely something to think about.